The crypt smelled of cold stone and old roses. Jon stood before the statue of the woman they told him was his aunt his whole life, and he tasted the lie on the back of his tongue like iron. Sam's words still hung between the carved pillars, half whisper, half accusation, and entirely true. Lyanna Stark had not been stolen and brutalized. She had loved and died, and she had pressed a name into her brother's hands like a secret sword. Aegon. He could not make his mouth shape it even in silence. "It's not just what my father told me," Sam said, voice thready with a tremor he tried to hide. In his hands lay parchments, brittle as old bark. "It's written here, sealed by a septon and 2 witnesses. Bran saw it in the past. He sees things, you know that. It's lawful, Jon. You're not Jon, not Snow, not a bastard," he said, too quietly. The words seemed not to move the air at all. "You want me to say it, Sam? I was the one who bent the knee to Daenerys. I told the North to trust her." Sam swallowed. The candlelight made his eyes look wet. "I know what you told them, and what you've told yourself. But I have to tell you this. It's not about what either of us wants." Jon looked at the stone face of Lyanna, eternally young, eternally sorrowful beneath her wreath. Robert Baratheon's lies had been simple, heavy things. This truth was a blade with many edges. "I have never wanted the throne," Jon said. "Neither did my father," Sam said. "And he held the realm together as long as he could." Father. The word ached. Ned Stark had always been a quiet honor, a hearthfire that never wavered. He knew now that Ned had borne a stranger's child into his home and shielded him with silence that cost him his marriage, his name, and perhaps his life. Jon traced the thought like a scar with the tip of his mind. He earned the right to keep it quiet. But the realm is colder than the crypts, and the dead were marching. "It changes everything," Jon said, his breath fogged before him. He thought of Daenerys' smile like pale fire, of the warmth in her eyes when she spoke of breaking wheels and chains. He thought of the dragon beneath him, the wind cutting his face, a freedom so clear it felt like a prayer. He thought of the North, of Sansa's watchful blue, Arya's quick, dark humor, Bran at the heart of the Godswood, unfathomable as the carved face in the weirwood. He thought of men who had followed him and died because they believed his word was iron. Sam said very softly, "It changes nothing about why the dead should be stopped. It only changes what comes after if we survive." Jon turned to him. "I can't wear another lie, not now." "Then don't," Sam said. "Tell them, all of them. Tell her, too." He had imagined other paths. To bury the truth beneath snow and vows, to hold it in his heart like a hot coal he could not drop without burning the world. But he had been raised by a man who did not flinch from hard things. "I will," Jon said. "Tonight." The great hall creaked and sighed like an old ship in icy seas. Torches threw long banners of smoke up toward the rafters. Around trestles crowded with salted pork and dark ale, men and women from a dozen lands eyed one another over the rims of cups. Fur-clad Northmen, grim, disciplined, unsullied. Laughing Dothraki whose laughter turned to knives without warning. Exiles and free folk and knights with their sigils stitched quick and crooked into their surcoats. The hearth devoured a log with a sigh like a beast sated, and the walls answered with the long hush of stone. Daenerys sat near the fire at the high table, the light laying warm along her hair. She looked younger by firelight, the forge heat shining in her eyes. Tyrion had been talking, making some jest about the way Northerners drink as if they feared to see the bottom of a cup, and she had half smiled. Grey Worm's face was grave and unreadable. Yora's hands were quiet and careful around the handle of his cup. Missandei watched the hall, always listening more than she spoke. Sansa's hands were folded, her fingers so still they might have been carved from the tabletop. Jon walked the length of the hall as if each flagstone hit a spear, and when he stopped at the hearth, the hum of voices thinned. "My lords," he said. His voice carried more strongly than he felt. "My ladies, there is truth that must be spoken." It was not how he had planned to be a boy, to stand before a hall and turn the world upon his tongue. He thought of Ser Davos, who had once told him that too many words spoiled even truth. But this was truth so rich and terrible it would not be held in a few syllables. "I swore to fight for the living," Jon said. "I swore as a bastard of Winterfell. I swore as a Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. I swore as a king in the north. I bent the knee to the Queen Daenerys because I believed we needed her strength to stand against death and win. None of that changes tonight, but something else has come to light. I learned it not an hour past from Samwell Tarly and Brandon Stark. My mother was Lyanna Stark. My father was Rhaegar Targaryen. I am their lawful son, born in secret and kept so for fear of Robert's wrath. I am Aegon Targaryen." Noise came first like the snap of a bowstring, then the full thunder of many voices breaking loose at once. Sansa was on her feet before she knew it, color draining from her skin. Arya did not move, but her eyes widened, narrowing again a heartbeat later like a cat's at a new scent. Bran's gaze did not lift from his plate, yet something, the set of his fingers, a minute tilt of his head, told Jon he was listening with all the cold weight of the godswood. Tyrion's face betrayed nothing, then everything. A shock, a calculation, a small involuntary laugh blown out like a candle, then a hand smoothing at his beard as if it could put order to the wide, wild board before him. Varys's eyes flickered, quicksilver. Yora's hand tightened so strongly on his cup that it creaked, and he set it down lest he crush it. Daenerys's eyes found Jon's. How strange that a gaze could be so gentle and so fierce at once. She stood without touching the table. "Who told you this?" she asked. Her voice was neither raised nor cold. It was iron pelting softly upon velvet. "Samwell, Brandon," Jon said. "There is a marriage record. There are the things Bran sees. He sees as the old gods see. Rhaegar loved another and set aside his marriage," Daenerys said. She looked from Tyrion to Varys and back, then at Missandei, as if to find some shape in their faces that would make this different. "In secret. With your pardon, your grace," Sam piped up from where he stood awkwardly near the hearth, blinking into the lights as if he had stumbled on stage. "It wasn't a setting aside. It was lawful annulment and remarriage. It's all. There's a seal." A murmur like a wind in leaves. Daenerys's fingers flexed once. Jon saw, or imagined he saw, the moment when she took the wound, accepted its depth and shape, and steadied herself around it. "So," she said softly, "if true, then by all the reckonings of lords and maesters, your claim is stronger than mine." "I don't want it," Jon said. He heard how it sounded, even to his own ears. His lips felt numb. "I never wanted any crown." "You told me the truth," Daenerys said. "You've been honest even when it made everything more difficult. If this is true, then it belongs to you whether you want it or not." Sansa's voice cut clean across the hearth's glow, bright with ice. "Do you mean to lay your head beneath her hand for the rest of our lives, cousin? Or will the North kneel to the Targaryen girl when the war is done because you are too honorable to speak a truth that belongs to you?" The room was tilting. Jon raised his hands to still it. "I did not bring this up to divide us. The dead are coming. They will be here soon. We have no time to quarrel over words and crowns. Words and crowns are all that have ever decided who lives and who dies," Tyrion said, and it was not a jest. "A claim like this, your grace, with respect." He inclined his head to Daenerys. "The shape of a camp changes when a new banner is raised, even if no one means to move the lines." Daenerys's attention returned to Jon. He saw, with a clarity that hurt, the many selves behind her face. The girl in a shuttered house without a country, the woman who had burned tyrants and freed slaves, the queen who had crossed a world for a dream bigger than any one person. "What do you intend to do?" she asked. Jon had rehearsed none of this, but he felt in his bones the way a cold morning tells a hunter which tracks are fresh. There was only one path through the snarl that did not end in lies. "I mean to claim what is mine," he said. The air thinned so suddenly he could not hear the crackle of the fire. "And I mean to do it openly now, not after the dead are beaten. I ask any who would fight for the living to stand for me, Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, rightful king of the Undulls and the Rhoynar and the First Men." Sansa sat very slowly. Her eyes were on Daenerys, not on him, and they were bright with both fear and something like triumph. Arya's hand was near the hilt of her blade only in habit. The small steel didn't care for crowns. Davos rubbed his mouth as if to push a prayer back down his throat. Tormund laughed once, a single bark, not unkind. The sound of benches dragging and boots thudding rose, then stopped as if held by an invisible rope. Daenerys's gaze did not waver. "Will you ask it of me?" she asked. "Will you ask me to give way?" He wanted to say no. He wanted to say yes and then break, to say that he would bend again, that he would lay his head in her lap and let the dragons of the world fly without him. He wanted too many things, and wanting had never been a compass he could trust. "I ask all in this hall to swear to me," Jon said. "And I ask you as well, not because I wish to humble you, not because I love you less, because if we survive the night to come, there must be one banner to gather the living, not two. Because I am what I am, and the realm must know it." The hall held its breath. Grey Worm's hand had found the haft of his spear without seeming to move. Jorah was watching Daenerys the way a man watches the tide that will either drown or bear him. Daenerys's chin lifted a fraction. "I swore long ago," she said, and her voice was suddenly terrible and beautiful. "I swore to break the wheel that has crushed people under it for generations. I swore to burn out cruelty and remake a world where children would not be sold and raped and used to by the vices of men with titles. I swore upon the memory of a brother who was weak and cruel and a brother who was brave and honorable. I did not cross an ocean to kneel at the end of it." "Then we're at war," Sansa said briskly, but Tyrion flinched as if at a blow. "No," Jon said harshly. "If we are at war tonight, we are all dead before dawn. Your Grace," he said to Daenerys, hating the way his tongue stumbled between love and duty. "Hear me. You are not my enemy, and I will not be yours, not while the dead walk. If you cannot swear me fealty, then swear truce until the Night King is broken. Lend me your strength, and I will answer for the lives we save. After, if you still will not bend the knee, I will meet you anywhere you name, before any council, with any lords to judge us. But I will not lie about who I am. Not anymore." Daenerys was very still. The hall was not breathing. Tyrion's fingers curled into his palm. Varys's lips had parted. Jorah's throat worked. "You would take what is mine with a kindness," Daenerys said, bleak as ash. "It is a rare theft." "I would take responsibility," Jon said. She looked at him for a long time. He saw decisions forming within her, streams gathering beneath ice. At last she nodded once, a slow lowering of a sword. "Truce," she said, "until dawn after the dead are defeated. I will not kneel. I will not ask you to either, but I will fight beside you." The air rushed back into the room as if someone had opened a door. Men started talking again, in those messy overlaps of relief and fresh fear that follow a reprieve. Sansa did not speak. She was looking at Jon as if he were a book written in a language she had forgotten and which terrified her to learn again. Tyrion stood. "If we are to live through this truce, we should speak of a plan. And this time, perhaps, we do not lead with the parts that make good songs." Jon managed to nod. The noise of the hall came and went around him in waves. He caught Davos's eye. The old knight tilted his head in a gesture that was both weary and proud. Sam looked like he might faint, then like he might burst into tears, then like he might be sick. Arya's mouth lifted at one corner, a private, sharp smile that did not quite reach her eyes. They made the war council then. In the glow of the hearth and the cold draft that slipped into corners, they set pieces upon the table and tried to pretend they were not men and women making marks upon their own lives. Bran spoke in that voice that was not quite a boy's voice. The Night King would come for him, for the mark he had left upon Bran's flesh and whatever it meant in the language of the dead. The godswood would be bait and trap. Theon Greyjoy, with his Ironborn, would protect Bran within its pale trees, a penance and a plea for grace. The Dothraki would not ride into the dark like a wave breaking itself against night. They would be held in reserve, loosed only when fire lit the field. The Unsullied would hold a disciplined line before the trenches. Dragons would not swoop blind into cold cloud and be lost like sparks in wind. They would be eyes and flame above the walls, responding to signals, not rage. Melisandre was not yet there to tell them that fire was a simple friend and a terrible one. Jon looked at Daenerys when they moved tokens that stood for dragons, and in his chest something went tender and pained, like a bruise touched. If she abandoned him tonight, he would not blame her. But she did not. She nodded, sharp and sure, at the parts of the plan that made sense and worried at the ones that didn't until they fitted better. Near the end of it, Tyrion cleared his throat. "There is the matter of the crypts," he said, turning a carved horse between his fingers. "They will be full of the vulnerable. If this Night King can raise the dead, he raises those he has slain," someone retorted. "Glover, Umber was already ashes on a pin. Ancient bones are bones, not men." "Make the doors iron and barred," Jon said. "Set guards even so. If we bar the dead within the earth with our wives and children, then we must post the best men at those bars. I will not have the crypts be the first place of mourning." They set men with iron in their spines at the iron doors. Davos frowned at the smoke that would fill the trench, how it might hide nearly as much as it illuminated. "Still," he said, "better to see less and have fire than to see all and be dead." Jon slept 2 hours before dawn. When he woke, the world had narrowed to breath and bone and blade. He strapped Longclaw to his hip, felt the familiar weight. Ghost shadowed him, a pale shape among dark ones. He found Daenerys in the courtyard with Drogon crouched behind her like a mountain. Rhaegal stood beyond with his tail lashing, restless as a boy before his first hunt. She looked up at Jon and said nothing. He touched her hand, and she took his fingers hard enough to hurt. No words would help them now, and all the words they wanted to say had become kindling for a fire they might never make. Night came with snow drifting sideways and that thready, high sound the wind makes just before it decides to scream. They stood upon the walls and saw nothing. They looked into a blackness so complete it felt thick, as if the darkness itself were pressing against the stones. The first riderless horse came limping out of it, its eyes dull, its breath steam that did not fade. "Not a step," Jon said, and a dozen commanders with good sense echoed it down the line. He could feel the Dothraki at the gate behind him, each of them a contained storm. Grey Worm's hand went up, tight and sharp. His men melted into a different, tighter shape like water poured into a jar. The horn blew once, twice. The trench crews stood ready, oil slopping and stinging in their nostrils. Dragonglass knives gleamed like strange milk in gloved hands. When the wave came, it came silent, a new dark charging out of the old. Eyes like chips of some bitter blue, mouths that were mouths no more. They hit the unsullied line like a storm hitting a cliff, and the cliff held. The sound was iron and bone and a wetness like butcher's work. The scream started then and never quite stopped. Jon and Daenerys rode the sky. Holding to Rhaegal's spine, Jon felt an old, wild joy fray against a newer, colder duty. He had found a thing to love almost as much as the people he served, and his love was a borrowed creature of smoke and sinew. He signaled with a horn he wore at his waist. Daenerys answered, their dragons wheeled, and the trench sparked with an arcing ribbon of fire. Blue-white flares of dragonglass bolt and arrow streaked into the mass beyond. Each small extinguishment a victory one could not count. The dead did not shrink from flame as living men do, but flame broke their forms, and that was enough. More times than he could believe, Jon saw one of his friends fall and rise to fight again a heartbeat later. The dead were a sea, and they wanted to drown them. A shape darker than night broke the clouds, and the cold that dropped with it took Jon's breath like a hand on his throat. Viserion's roar was a sound like ice cracking across a river. Rhaegal answered, and when they met, Jon's teeth rang in his skull. He reached with voice and knees, W. Ith will, asking the dragon for a dive that would bring them under and up, out of the blue fire's scything fall. Rhaegal obeyed with a twist that felt reckless and exactly right. He saw Daenerys looping wide, Drogon and Ember in a storm. He did not plan to meet the Night King. The plan put him in the air and Daenerys guarding from above while the rest held the line and the godswood was bait. Plans never love the field, and the field never loves them back. When he saw, from a loss of cloud and a sharp, terrible glimpse of pale antlers that were not antlers, that the Night King was moving toward the godswood on foot, with his guard of white shadows like shards of moon, Jon did not consult any plan. He leaned forward and Regal dropped, and wind tore tears from his eyes. They landed outside the outer ring of trees because if he tried to put 12 feet of dragon through tight trunks, he would have a dead dragon and a dead king together. He hit the ground running with Ghost beside him, white fire and white snow, men in his wake. He heard, distantly, the cry that meant the trench had gone out and then back in, like a breath taken too hastily. He did not stop to count. He crashed through branches in a shower of ice crystals and bark, and the world narrowed again as the gods would always narrows it, red leaves and white bark and the sound of blood in ears. Theon stood before Bran with his iron born, a thin line of gray steel and determination. He had always had a neck like a stag's when he was a boy, and it looked that way again now, long, intense, and beautiful with fear. He met Jon's eye and nodded once, and Jon said, "Hold a little more." Though he had no right to ask it, the Night King moved like a dream moves, a reality but not of the living world. He stepped into the soft red drift of the weirwood leaves. Blue light filmed the air around him. The White Walkers fanned out with movements that were not human, not graceful, not clumsy. Something else, like the motion of snowmelt across stone. Jon saw his breath plume and fall as if it were a thing too heavy to rise. Bran sat in his chair of carved wood and looked up as if greeting a guest at Winterfell's gate. Jon drew Longclaw. Valyrian steel looked black in the red light under the tree. The Night King turned his head, and their gazes met in that thin corridor between the living and the dead. Jon began to move before fear could fill his limbs and close his throat. He met a walker first, the creature's sword ringing against Longclaw with a sound that hurt to hear. Ghost slammed into another with the force of a falling tree, and bone shattered like old glass. Theon's men stepped forward and were broken and stepped forward again. Jon closed with the Night King because he could not think of anything else and because the thought of Arya, where was Arya, kept an echo of Summerhall inside his skull that he did not understand and could not bear.
Longclaw met pijlspier.
For a heartbeat, a winter older than the wall jolted up his arm. The world was cold and immediate and very simple. He knew the place of his feet, the angle of his shoulder, the smell of old sap and new blood. He struck again, and the spear glanced and lifted. He stepped inside and brought the blade down toward the rent where plate met mail at the collar. It should have ended there. It did not. The Night King moved without haste and parried with that too smooth economy. And Jon understood in some bleak part of himself that this was a man who had once been capable of grace and had surrendered it to something else. The thought did not help him. He fainted low, brought the point up, felt his blade bite and then skate. The Night King's hand came up, and cold took Jon's breath again. And he remembered dying on a cold table once already. Remembered the feel of knives like a storm. Remembered that life was a gift given not to be hoarded. A blur. The white of a wolf. The slap of branches. The Night King's head tilted slightly, and Jon saw the slightest settling of his weight onto that left foot. He trusted the knowledge of bodies his life had saved and taken. He let himself fall, dropping out of line as if he had stumbled, leading with a clumsy slash. The Night King, the perfect opponent, struck to exploit weakness. Jon's fall turned into a lunge, his whole body a pivot around the planted right foot. Longclaw's edge bit into the Night King's lowered arm, and the sound it made was like thick ice breaking under an axe. The arm snapped. There was no blood. The Night King's face did not change. He stepped back half a pace, and as he did, a shadow moved behind him with the quick, impossible grace of something that had always known how to move through the spaces between steps. Arya came out of air and leaves. The little blade in her right hand flashed, and the Night King's broken left arm rose with unearthly speed and caught her by the throat. Jon's heart cracked. He was moving and not moving. He brought Longclaw up, but the White Walkers stepped as one and blocked him. and their blades spoke a word in steel he could not translate. Arya's eyes were enormous, not with fear but with the total comprehension of a life at its edge. Her mouth opened as if to laugh, and her left hand dropped the blade when his grip tightened, then caught it again below, as smooth and inevitable as the fall of water. She plunged it up into the place where the Night King's ribs met. The sound was not sound so much as the absence of it, a sucking in, a rush like 1,000 candles being pinched to darkness all at once. The Night King did not scream. He shattered. He came apart like something that had never been, and around him his guard fell into snow like shards that melted not into wet but into a breath of cold that was already leaving. The gods would expelled a sigh. The world's color returned a degree. Arya fell and Jon caught her. Her throat was red where the fingers had pressed, but she was breathing, eyes already in. Gry at him for catching her like a child. "I had him," she rasped. "I saw," Jon said hoarsely, and laughed because he could not laugh, a wild little bubble of awe and relief that made his ribs ache. Bran looked at them as if from a long way away and gave the slightest nod to something that was not quite them. Then he blinked and was a boy again and very tired. The dead did not all fall at once across the field. They folded, they faltered, they lost that terrible unity. Men came weeping into the courtyard with hands covered in a grayish dust and eyes wide with the shock of having their lives restored to them again only to have to spend them still. The trench burned again. On the walls men cheered without meaning to. When it was done, Winterfell was a ruin of blood and ice and fire black. In the yard, rows were made as stillness grew where motion had been all night. The dead were laid with care born of exhaustion, and the living swayed over them like reeds in a wind that had not made up its mind. Lyanna Mormont's body was small upon her bier. Yora's blood had dried on his torn furs. His face quieted into something almost boyish. Theon lay within a circle of Ironborn who were suddenly just men forever away from their coasts. Melisandre walked out through the gates like a candle being carried away to light some other room and collapsed into dust that the wind took. At the pyres Jon spoke the words that fire always asks for. He did not say names he did not know. He said the names he did, slower than someone who had ever liked to speak. When he came to Theon, his voice thickened, and he had to swallow. He thought of Ed's voice, which would never answer again, of Hodder, brave and simple as living oak, of men whose faces he would never be able to place to their deeds. He thought of the blade sliding into the Night King, the world ending and beginning, both beneath a tree older than language. Daenerys's face by the pyres was not a place he knew. She kissed Yora's brow and said something in a language Jon could not speak, and when she lifted her head, ash had settled upon her lashes. She did not brush it away. They ate, they drank, they slept like stones. Morning came and found Winterfell held together by stubbornness and rope. Before the midday meal, Varys came to Jon in the yard with a face like a friend at a funeral who is about to say something unforgivable and necessary. "You have won the night for the living," he said without preface. "The realm will hear it and begin to shape itself around the idea. The question will not be whether you are king, but whether people will get in the way of it and how many will die when they do." "I told her," Jon said. His mouth was dry. "I told everyone." "Yes," Varys said gently, "and she agreed to truce. Truce is a rope. It can bind or it can cut a man in half." He looked toward the inner yard where Daenerys stood with Grey Worm, speaking low. "I will speak plainly to you because plain speech has carried you this far. She loves you. She also believes that a destiny speaks through her. The two may come to war inside her. I would prefer they did not, for the sake of all involved." Jon had not thought he could be more tired, but a new layer of weariness folded around him like a wet cloak. "What do you want me to do?" "Choose," Varys said. "Choose now, when your choosing might be a hand upon the rudder rather than a fist upon a blade. Will you demand her fealty today, while she is bleeding and her grief is as raw as yours? Will you offer marriage and bind two claims into one while the realm sways like a drunk man and would seize at any steadying shoulder? Will you declare that the North will be free and you do not want the South at all? Each way is a door, and behind each door is a different number of dead people. Marriage? Jon said quietly, and the word startled him because he had not known it was already there. He thought of other tables, other halls where lords had cut the realm into pieces and stitched it back together with wedding vows. He had thought those men craven, but perhaps they had been only thin and tired and trying to make something stand. I would not make her into anything she is not. We would be equals. 2 dragons, 1 sky. Varys's mouth twitched. History is never kind to equals, but it has rarely had the chance to be. I am glad you think of it. Speak to her. He found Daenerys in the small kitchen off the main hall where the heat lingered and the smell of bread was the first good smell in days. She was not surrounded by attendants. She had learned long ago when she wanted to be alone and yet not be alone to choose the hum of kitchens, the dependable clatter of women who did work that did not change because kings died and others took their places. He did not speak right away. He watched her choose a heel of bread from a cooling loaf and hold it in her hands as if heat could go from it into her skin. She lifted her eyes when she had finished knowing he was there and letting herself be a woman in a room with bread for a final breath. "Will you walk?" he asked. They walked the wall where it was still a wall and not a gap into which the sky was staring. Snow crunched thin and brittle beneath their boots. His breath made ghosts. Hers did too. "I would not take something from you with a kindness," she said at last, and he realized she had been holding the line of the conversation they had not had as if it were the hand of a child near a cliff. Her eyes were hard. "I meant that." "I know," he said. "I cannot ask you to kneel. I will not kneel to you. So we are left with daggers and lies unless there is another way." "And what is that?" she asked, as if daring the world to have the answer on its tongue. "Marriage," he said. "Marry me. Let the realm have 1 king and 1 queen with 1 purpose. Let us be the rope that holds." He expected argument, laughter, a flush in her cheeks and a quick darting look to his mouth. That would make him forget he was a king and only a man. What he saw instead was fear so naked it made him ashamed. Her hand came up and fell again. "I have loved before," she said. "Every time it has cost someone dearly. My marriage became what other men needed it to be. My children are dead. My blood has been a road for men to walk to their own ends. I cannot be only a solution to your problem." "You would be yourself," Jon said. "I do not know how to make you believe that. I only know that I would never ask you to be less. I ask you to be more. With me." She gave a sound that was half a laugh, half a small, fierce sob. "You have a way of saying things that sound like lies even though they're not. I have always believed that if I reached out, I could take the world like a wheel in my hands and turn it. I am not certain I can hold onto anything that holds me back from that." "I would not hold you back," he said. "I'd stand with you so when you push, you do not fall. We are stronger together." She looked out across the yard, where men were rebuilding a wall with stones that did not want to fit the way they had before. "They will say you are only doing this to secure your claim." "They will be right," Jon said. "They will also be wrong. I would say yes to this if I were a bastard still. I would say it if there were no thrones at all." Her head turned quickly. She searched his face as if there were a cipher there she could crack with patience. She breathed out, long and slow. "We have a war yet. Cersei will not open her gates to bread and honest speeches." "No," he said, "but she might open them to hunger and siege. If we plan like people who intend the living to be there afterward, we can starve her without burning the people who cannot flee her." Daenerys's mouth went tight. "I have burned men because the choice before me was burning a few to save many. I do not like the smell, nor the screams, nor the way it makes people look at me after. But I have not been a coward." "You are not a coward," Jon said. "Avoiding fire on children is not cowardice. It is wisdom. We take the fleets. We take the road to the capital. We show them we can break their spears and still keep the city whole, and maybe they surrender and we have fewer dead. If they don't, then we decide what we are willing to do. You want to be the kind of king who asks as little as possible of his people," she said, an edge gentled by exhaustion. "And when it's not possible, you want to be the kind that carries more than his share." She laughed softly. "Perhaps that is a good kind to be, but you cannot carry dragons." Then don't ask me to, he said. Fly them where they do the least harm and the most good. Make me better than I am. Let me make you gentler than you have had to be. She turned fully then, and the wind lifted threads of her hair. She looked not like a queen or a conqueror, but like a woman who had walked too far and found the road hard. She reached out and took his hand, and this time she did not crush. She clasped. Yes, she said, voice so low he felt it more than heard it. After the city is ours, or after we bleed our last trying. Either way, I will not go alone any longer. The city did not fall easily. It had never belonged easily to anyone who did not have fire behind him. But the ways into King's Landing had been built by men who believed that stone was as permanent as God and that walls were prayers. Stone can be starved. Walls do not eat. Jon sat in a campaign tent south of the Blackwater and moved tokens along a map while Tyrion spoke in a voice that was not quite even for all his attempts at it. The Golden Company will stand before the gate because it makes a good picture and because Cersei has always liked standing men in a line and calling it strategy, Tyrion said. The Scorpions are with the fleet and upon the walls. The Iron Fleet is commanded by a man who thinks he is a storm and is only a man who has swallowed a lot of salt. Yara wants him dead as badly as we do. If we bring him to battle at night, under cover of clouds and with dragons at his back instead of scouting ahead like torches, he may not have time to bring the Scorpions to bear. Grey Worm nodded. We should send a small force with her to cut the bay's mouth at night. Our men can swim, theirs can too, but they won't expect it. We can open the boom chain and your dragon. He glanced to Daenerys. There was always a moment when he looked at her as if he were standing before an altar and needed to remember the words of the prayer. Daenerys' eyes flicked to Jon, then back to the map. I will be where I am most useful. The Iron Fleet burned my home. Let us burn his. They timed it to a moonless night beneath a cloud cover that lay low like a hand held flat over the bay. Yara's fast ships slid out like seals, black on black. Grey Worm's men went over the sides without a sound and swam to the chain where it crossed beneath the water's surface. Knives bit into wet rope. Drogon came down like an unkind thought, but not upon the ships, upon the water itself before them, making steam bloom in a blind linen sheet. Euron's men screamed at ghosts and shot at nothing. By the time the first scorpion found its latch and followed its aim, a shadow much too large to belong to any bird stooped into it and tore it apart as if it were a toy. Rhaegal's roar rolled from the other side, answering. A ship went up like a torch dropped into a dry barn. Another caught. Men leaped into black ink and disappeared as if swallowed by the page. On the walls, Qyburn's toys creaked and complained. They had been built to answer dragons without waking the true imagination of dragons. Where fire found them, they drooped and became scrap and a memory of cleverness. Where men worked them, men died at their posts. When the sun rose over Blackwater Bay, there were fewer ships in it than there had been, and they belonged to people who were
Od Cersei Lannister.
The Golden Company stood very straight outside the gate, and Harry Strickland sat very straight on his horse, and for the first time in his well-fed life, he did not believe he had counted the coins correctly. Jon rode before his line with Davos and Brienne to either side, and when he called out, he did not call to the gilded gentlemen but to the small men who stood behind them and had no gold at all. You have been paid to die for a throne that will not pay you back, he shouted, and the wind tugged at his words, but some of them reached and stuck. I am Aegon Targaryen. That name may mean little to you. This may mean more. If you lay down arms and open the gate, no man among you will be slaughtered for his choice. Lay down arms and go home. We will not pursue. We ride for those who have no choice in what walls they were born behind. Strickland lifted his hand. Someone blew a trumpet. The line advanced 3 paces. Then, as if a thought had been passed hand to hand down the files, a dozen men set down pikes. 2 dozen more back to step. Someone laughed the way a man laughs at a gallows. The line wavered. A banner dipped and then fell. The gate did not open yet, but it loosened, like a mouth that had held a bitter phrase too long. Cersei did not weep. She had done that. She had done almost everything, and none of it had saved the part of her that had once been a girl who believed that being beautiful and cruel would be enough to not be hurt. She stood in the tower and watched her men become men again and not pieces. She lifted her cup because she liked the weight of it in her hand and because she liked to feel something weigh her down that was not a child or a crown. Qyburn spoke in a murmur behind her that gave her comfort because it never asked anything of her that she would not do anyway. The mountain stood, a hillside in armor, not breathing so much as existing. Jaime had ridden all night to catch up with the world that had moved on without him. He had none of his glory and all of his sins. He was very tired of being in love with women who were not good for him and with an idea of himself that was not angry enough at the boy who had pushed a child from a window. He had tried to leave that man on the road north, to let him go like a hawk let from a fist. He had found instead that the hawk circled back to his glove. He turned his horse toward the city because the city had always been his cage and he knew the way into cages even when the doors were new. He met Brienne at the outworks where the new siege lines were being marked like stitches. She did not cry. She looked at him and shook her head once, and he did not say anything because it would make him small. He only touched his fingers briefly to hers like a man testing a blade's edge and then rode on. And she did not stop him because it was not her place and because you cannot hold a man who has decided to revert to his worst self without breaking him or yourself or both. The bells rang at noon. They had rung before for other surrenders, for other kings. The sound is the same across years the way the smell of bread is the same across kitchens. The gate opened. Jon felt the moment pass through him like a season. He looked to Daenerys. Her face was beautiful and terrible and unreadable. Drogon's wings shifted against the light like a thought before speech. "They are yielding," Tyrion said, almost pleading. "They are telling us the city is ours if we will take it without making of it." "I hear them," Daenerys said. Her hand tightened in Drogon's ridges. She looked at the red, keep the way a woman looks at a house that has injured everyone she has ever loved. She had the power to turn it to glass. She had the will. She had a promise from a man beside her that the world could be different after if she left it standing. She shut her eyes. Drogon hissed through his teeth and then went still. When Daenerys opened her eyes again, they were wet and fierce and very human. "Take the city," she said. "Take it whole." They rode in with their banners furled. There were fights still. Knots of men whose lives had been bound up with a queen and who did not know how to cut themselves loose without cutting their throats. Grey Worm killed as if each kill were a prayer he was reciting to remember his old gods. The Hound and the Mountain met on the stair and fulfilled a prophecy that had not had the decency to name itself properly. And both fell into the fire that they had both always deserved and never chosen. Cersei, when she saw her city had become a city again and not a throne room, drank the last of her wine and threw the cup aside. She tried to leave with what little dignity a lioness has when the snares around her legs are visible to everyone. Jaime met her in a passage, and for a moment they were two children in a tower again. Before anyone knew they were bad for each other. He took her hand. She did not pull away. He did what he had always done best and worst. He made a terrible choice if it spared someone else. He brought her to the lower vault where Qyburn had lied and said there was no more wildfire and found that the old sorcerer had been honest for once. The vault was empty, and a wall had cracked and then settled as if exhaling. "You always believed you could pull the string and it would become lace," Jaime said. "Now look. You always wanted to be better than you were," she said, and there was no malice in it. "Now look." They stood together and watched, and when men came with iron that had no poetry in it, Cersei lifted her chin and walked between them without trembling. It was not the end she would have written. It was an ending. It is more than many of us get. In the dragon pit the next day, there were no dragons. Drogon heaved in the shade of a broken arch like a hill still breathing. Rhaegal watched with a slow, lidless gaze. The lords of what remained of the kingdoms stood in a circle and tried to remember how to be lords when the throne that had taught them to be so was a few streets away and quiet. Sansa wore her hair like a crown of her own, and her back said everything her mouth did not yet. Arya stood as if she were not there at all. Bran's chair looked like it had grown up from the ground. Gendry looked terrified and thrilled to be where no smith should be. Edmure began to speak and then stopped when Sansa looked at him with sisterly pity and firm kinly disdain. Tyrion, who was not yet forgiven for being alive and never would be by some who needed someone to blame, stepped forward with the caution of a man treading water. "We can hold another execution," he said, "and another after that and call it justice. Or we can decide to stop the wheel from turning in blood for a moment and call that wisdom. There are two claims here. Either would serve. I propose we accept both and get something different in return than we get when we wager everything on one and then smash the other. Let the realm have a king and a queen. Let them share the work the way two hands share the work of lifting a weight that is too heavy for one. Let the North choose its own way if it must, and let the rest of us be strangers to that quarrel, because I am tired of sending boys to die to decide whether a trout should be on the same banner as a lion." Sansa was ready. She had been ready since before she knew there would be a room like this and a circle like this. "The North remembers," she said, and the words had become larger than the girl who had first heard them as a bedtime warning. "We bled for kings who thought of us as a wall, not a country. We have broken our swords on their wars. We will not kneel to another southern crown no matter who wears it, Stark or Targaryen. The North will stand apart." She looked at Jon when she said it. For a moment anger like static filled the air between them. Then he nodded once, a tiny grief, a huge relief. "The North will be free," Jon said aloud, as if tasting it to be sure it was real. "I will be king where dragons fly and seas speak louder than trees. She," he looked to Daenerys, "will be queen. We will rule together and try to be good. We will not ask a country that never wanted us to pretend it does. I ask only this, that we trade, that we talk, that we open our roads to each other's messengers and our ears to each other's counsel." Yara grunted. "The Iron Islands stand with the dragon for now," she said. "As long as no one says we must build gardens and wear shoes in our own halls." "The Vale stands with its warden," said Lord Royce gruffly, and Sansa inclined her head. "We have had enough of kings coming and going as if the Eyrie were a wayhouse." "Dorne stands with no one and with itself," said a woman in orange with a smile that looked like a knife you could pick up by the blade if you were careful. "But we will come to your weddings, and our singers will be better than yours." Laughter shook loose like birds startled from branches. It broke tension and did not banish it. It was enough. They crowned him in the Red Keep because to refuse would be to let the memory of it linger like a wound. He walked into the throne room and saw the chair like a heap of old sins and thought of melting it until it was a shapeless thing. He did not. History is a stubborn dog. The more you pull, the more it plants its feet. He put his hand upon the arm that had been beaten into that shape with a hammer and the heat of other people's wars. "I will sit here," he said softly to no one. "I will get up often. I will not let it become a chair fused to my bones." He sat. The hall sang with murmurs of the living. Daenerys stood to his left, and when the crown went onto her head, the sound of it, soft metal upon dark hair, made something in him lift and then settle. The small council he made was an odd shape. Tyrion was hand because he knew the cost of being wrong and had learned to speak even into shame. Davos was master of ships because he had lived most of his life upon a knife-edged deck and had not fallen. Brienne wore white and did not like it, but there were girls who would point at her and choose steel rather than silence because of it. Missandei took the parchment and spoke the world across tables in languages that made men listen and be embarrassed not to know them. Varys vanished one day like a candle snuffed, and no one could say why except the whisper of whispers that the realm does not always reward those who try to save it from its dreams. Grey Worm brought the Unsullied to stand as a spine until a spine grew. He did not smile when he was thanked, and he did not ask for gardens, and he did not tell anyone what he dreamed at night. He sailed away, at last, to a place where no one had ever taught him to fear a name, leaving a line of spears behind like a hedge to keep the wolves out. Sansa went north with a train that grew as it moved, girls in thick cloaks, men with axes, wagons full of flour because flour is what victories buy when they are going to last. She stopped at Moat Cailin and looked south without sentiment. She looked north and did not smile exactly, but the cold in her eyes was a good cold, the kind that keeps food through winter and keeps greedy hands out of doors. Arya looked west at an ocean that had been there before any of them and would be there when their stones had worn smooth. She did not write a letter to anyone telling them why she was leaving. She did not need to. She kissed her brother's cheek and said, "Don't get killed." And he said, "You too." And that was what passed for love between them, which was more than many got. Bran sat under a tree in a garden that had not had a tree in it for a long time and let roots tangle in the cracked flagstones. Sometimes he was a boy. Sometimes he was a feeling that belongs to old places. Sometimes he was a very present silence. And in those moments Jon felt lighter and more watched than when surrounded by men with eyes. Daenerys walked the galleries of the Red Keep and learned the lengths of hallways that had once been walked by kings who had done terrible things and kings who had done ordinary things in ways that made them terrible. She stood in the room where she had been born and had not remembered and let herself cry for that girl, and she did not do it often, and she did not do it where anyone could make a story out of it that did not respect it. They were not perfect. They yelled at each other. They slept badly. They said yes to some supplicants they should have refused and no to some they should have found a way to say yes to. They sent men to gallows and girls to rooms they had not wanted to enter because the law sometimes looks like an ugly slope down which you slide because the alternative is an uglier, steeper one. They loved one another, and sometimes they were too tired for it, and sometimes the weight of it was the only thing that kept them upright. Once, in the first autumn, a crop failed in the Reach not because of war but because of a blight no maester fully understood. The old answers would have been to let the poor eat the bark from trees and call it misfortune and the gods' will. They opened the granaries instead. They sent ships. They moved coin that had slept like a dragon upon its treasure and made it into bread. There were merchants who cursed their names for lowering prices and lords who called it weakness. There were boys who lived because of it and girls who became women who would remember it. Another winter, thin as an old man's hair, then sudden and mean, fell upon the Riverlands. Men with old grudges took the dark as license. They sent out riders not to hunt with torches like trophies, but to hold the roads in honest light. Arya, who had come back for a wedding and found herself staying a month, went out with one party and came back with a cut on her cheek and a smile she had mistaken for gone. "It's better work," she said when Sansa scolded. "If I'm to draw a blade at all." There were always men who whispered that the Targaryen boy was only stark stubbornness in a dragon's jacket, that the queen was mad and biding her time. There were always nights when Jon woke with his heart pounding because he had heard the wind make a sound like walking and had seen blue where there was no sky. He took Ghost into the courtyard then and walked the walls. He did not sleep again those nights, and he came down into morning with eyes like a hound's. The wedding was in the dragon pit because some places need new memories more than others need old ones. The High Septon spoke a blessing in a voice careful not to shake. A dozen gods listened with their different faces. When Daenerys and Jon turned to the people, there was a small silence because the world had held its breath a long time and did not yet quite believe it could exhale. Then it did. People cheered as if they had been waiting their whole lives to do it. Drogon flamed the sky not over the city but over the sea, and the light made the bay look like a sheet of hammered copper, and the bells were still this time. After, when the last of the sweet wine had been drunk and Tyrion had told the last of his allowable jokes and missed only the ones that would get him exiled again, Jon and Daenerys walked into the lower garden where anything that grew had had to fight for it because roofs keep out more than rain. They stood in the shadow of a wall that had once hidden secrets and now hid only ivy. "Do you think we did it?" she asked into the growing dark. "What?" Jon said, and then he smiled because he knew. "No will breaks at once, but it's moving differently. That's something." Her shoulder leaned into his. He breathed in the smell of her hair, the clean scent of skin and something that always reminded him of storm air before it goes. "I could have burned them," she said, quiet and fierce and without regret, as if talking about something she had the right to say yes to. "I feel it sometimes like a hunger, but then I look at the streets. I look at the faces. I look at my own hands. I don't want to be only the sum of what was done to me." "You're not," he said. "You never were. Nor are you." They did not promise to be better than the world would let them be. They kissed like people who had made a decision and would keep making it every day until they couldn't. When they broke, They turned toward the light spilling from the hall and went in together. Years do not pass kindly. They do not pass cruelly. They pass like years do. Ghost went gray at the edges of his muzzle, and then more so, and still his eyes were red and sharp as wet berries. Drogon grew larger than anything that had ever flown above the city and frightened mothers and made boys dream of joining the guard. Regal grew scarred at the flank and limped upon landing for a month, and then stopped limping and bit a cat that had decided to sleep on his tail, and the city told that story for a winter. Sansa's hair went streaked with silver, and she wore it like more winter light. Arya wrote a letter from a place no one knew the name of with drawings in the margins because she had never liked writing and still didn't. Bran smiled a thin, tired smile when someone told him they thought they'd seen a great white wolf in the far woods, as if he knew something about wolves that people did not, which he did. Once, in a small court held for small things, an old woman came and asked for justice because a lordling's dogs had pulled down her goat. It was not a matter to bring to a king. It was not a matter to bring to a queen. They listened anyway. Daenerys leaned over the edge of the dais and asked the woman to tell her the goat's name, and the woman, being vain and tired, said it was Queen Riella, which made half the court attempt to swallow laughter like a mouthful of soup gone wrong and made the other half too frightened to laugh. Daenerys laughed herself and said the G. Oat had chosen a good name and ordered the lordling to pay for 3 goats and to feed the woman's firewood for the winter because cold is no kinder to old bones than dogs are to small goats. Afterwards, Jon teased her for the way she had asked the goat's name, and she said, "People who don't look at others' goats don't look at their own dragons very well either." And then he kissed her in the corridor because he had not been a boy in a long time but still sometimes felt like one. And there were days when people died and it was no one's fault, and that was harder. He went back to the crypts alone once or twice a year. The first time, the torches waved in their iron brackets and the roses were still as old as the stones, and as he knelt before Lyanna, he found that his anger had leached away as a bruise does. In its place was a quiet that felt heavier and more honest. "I did what you made possible," he said. "I tried to. I try still." The stone did not answer, and it did not need to. He had never said the name, not once, not upon his own tongue where it could be captured and turned into a story that would make him into a man he was not good enough to be nor interested in becoming. Aegon. He wore the crown because it had to sit somewhere. He wore the name because names fit you or they don't. Jon fit him. Aegon was a piece of history he carried like a coin in his pocket to pay for things the world demanded be bought with old currency. He did not love it. He did not hate it. He held it and let it keep its edge. On a morning that promised rain and delivered it late, he stood on the walls with Daenerys and watched a child run along a path below with a kite made from rag cloth and bent twigs. The kite's tail fluttered like a laugh. The child almost ran into a column of Unsullied and then darted out of their way without fear because these men had stood and stood until the city had learned to trust the standing. The boy's mother called his name, and it was one Jon had never heard before and would never again, but it made him smile anyway. "I don't know if I was right to claim it when I did," he said. "You were," Daenerys said, "because you did. When a thing has happened, it becomes right or wrong by what grows from it." "What grows from us?" he asked. She lifted her chin, eyes gone far and not. The rain began in earnest then, dotting the stone, laying cool on his scalp, making the city smell clean for a breath. "Bread," she said, "and a little mercy, and fewer songs than some kings get. I hope that means more food on tables and fewer boys with songs to sing about being brave at 16. He thought of the songs. He had never liked them. He had been the subject of a few that had made him want to crawl under the table and hide like a dog that had knocked over a pot and been shouted at. He let himself laugh soft as the rain. Fewer songs and more goats named after queens. "Many goats," she agreed. When autumn came soft and left politely, and when winter came next and found stores as ready as they had been able to make them, and when spring returned like a cautious comrade and decided to stay a while, he still woke some nights with cold hands and a heart beating like a drum meant to drive men across fields toward spears. He would go out then to the garden where it had taken 3 years to make the trees agree to grow, and he would stand beneath their thin shade and count breaths. He did not always return to sleep. Sometimes he found Daenerys there before him, barefoot upon the old stone, her hair unbound. They did not always speak. Sometimes she would tell him quietly that a new crop had taken root along the summer sea where no food had been possible in living memory because someone had taught them a better way to keep water. Sometimes he told her about a boy in the watch who had not yet learned to stop trying to please the men who did not like him and how he wanted to find a way to teach him the trick without making him hard. Sometimes they said nothing and let the dark do what it does when you allow it to be only the dark and not a place where monsters wait. In the end, there will be no ending that satisfies anyone but the dead. They do not ask for answers. They do not ask for bread. The living must be content with half answers, and with the relief there is to be taken in a loaf on a table. He claimed a throne when he should have been thinking only of a wall and a knight. He did it because he could not carry a lie any further without breaking his back, and because he believed men deserve the truth even when it is inconvenient and cruel. He was right to do it. He was wrong to do it. He did it. It made a world. It spared lives. Cost lives. It gave him a marriage that was not all softness and was all the softness he was likely to be made for. He carried the crown. It did not carry him. On good days he was a good king. On bad days he took off the chain that weighed upon his shoulders and gave it to the table for an hour and went down to the yard and struck at a post until his arms ached. And then he went back upstairs and did his work again. He died in a bed much later than he had any right to. He did not see the sword coming. He had seen it coming his whole life. But before that day and after it in the stories, he had made of a throne something on which a man could sit without cutting himself every time he breathed, and of a dragon something that could fly without being told always to burn. The rain stopped that morning as abruptly as a word spoken too quickly. The child's kite caught a fresh wind and lifted, bright as a scrap of sail. He put his hand over Daenerys's where it rested upon the wet stone, and her fingers turned and laced with his. Below them, the city went about the business of living as if it had been promised not to be interrupted again, and they let it keep that promise for a while.